What's in a name? So let me start by saying that words have meanings, but names have power. So we should not just consider a name as just a mere word. Names have power. And sometimes this power continues through generations, through times. It transcends time, it transcends millennia, it transcends miles, and it stays with us for forever sometimes, and sometimes for generations to come. If you see the larger Indian subcontinent, we have a large coastline. It is a peninsula, right? All three sides are surrounded by water. So this is the Saurashtra, Kutch and Saurashtra coast, the Konkan coast, the Malabar coast, the Coromandel coast, Bengal coast. Like this all are still known as that. But Kalinga coast today, people don't call it as a Kalinga coast, but this, of course, had been the great Kalinga coast for centuries and centuries. And the coastal people here, if you see, there is a very powerful saying in Southeast Asia about, how like water connects and land divides. Like that, coastal people have always felt more connected to other people in the coastal belts or across the sea and living like that. Now, traditional weaves, something like I'm wearing right now, ikata bandha weave from Odisha. Like you go all across Southeast Asia, you will even beyond Southeast Asia, but our point is right now Southeast Asia. You will find in Cambodian language ikat, that is the textiles name, and in Odia we call it bandha. So Cambodia, so Indonesian name is ikat. So you will find lot of Indonesian ikats even now, like getting woven, and they have a lot of patterns also which are similar to Indian ikats. So you find ikats everywhere, all across Southeast Asia. In fact, this Philippines and Laos ikat fabric, when I chanced upon these pictures, I had to take a double take because this looks so similar to something that is woven traditionally in Odisha. They carried land-finding birds with them, Dishakaka. Dishakaka has been in use not just in Kalinga, entire Indian, our Bharatvarshas, that entire antiquity of like navigation. You go and find in the Sindhu Saraswati civilization, in the Harappan Mohenjo-daron seals, you would find like depiction of Dishakaka. You would find Dishakakas in even Indonesian ikats. You would find Dishakaka in Odia Pattachitra. What are Dishakaka, you would ask me? They're something like land finding birds, or like how we use a GPS. So let's say they are in the seas and somehow they don't know, like it's a new voyage for them, not like the regular or the known path. Somehow the ship has veered off their way, and they're in uncharted waters. So how would they know that the land is near? They would send these dishakakas, and how they came back or not come back, or the time which that all like was pointer to the land that was lying ahead.
Namaste and welcome to another episode of Indic Talks. Today we are hosting Preeta Rout, who is going to talk about the glory of Odisha, the echoes and imprints of Kaling across the Indian Ocean realm as a nod to the glorious maritime heritage of the Kalingan seafarers, with special focus on Kaling's soft power. Our speaker Preeta Rout is a heritage and culture enthusiast, a Satyanveshi, curator of lesser-known facts about Bharatvarsha's socio-cultural legacies and heritage with a niche focus on Odisha, researching, unraveling, analyzing, and curating rare facts and connections. I welcome you, ma'am, and I request you to take over from here.
Namaskar, Ojaswi. Thank you so much for having me in this esteemed forum for Center for Indic Studies from the Indus University. I welcome you all today whoever are going to listen to this presentation today online, and also later if it is on YouTube and you chance to, happen into this presentation. So thank you for your time and your interest. I am Preeta. I'll be presenting on the topic of one of my most favorite topics because it's about my birthplace. It's about Odisha and Odisha's ancient name Kalinga. So without further ado, let me start my presentation. So the topic today is Kalinga. What's in a name? So let me start by saying that words have meanings, but names have power. So we should not just consider a name as just a mere word. Names have power. And sometimes this power continues through generations, through times. It transcends time, it transcends millennia, it transcends miles, and it stays with us for forever sometimes, and sometimes for generations to come. So what would you be expecting in this presentation today? We would talk about Kalinga, of course, the land and its people, its maritime excellence and hegemony, its reach and outreach across the Indian Ocean, the tangible and intangible imprints that you find about Kalinga all across the Indian Ocean realm, the reflections of a shared heritage, even today you can find, and some interesting trivia, which is just added brown matter for you at the end. But at the same time, we'll be also touching upon certain general things like toponymy, about the Indian Ocean realm as general, about littoral and coastal societies, about thalassocracies, and of course culture and heritage perception and propagation. Like UNESCO's recent thing is about the preservation of intangible heritages. So although we'll not go into details, so these things will be touched upon in my presentation overall, like in some way or the other. So here you can see a little picture I have taken of a phrase from one of the temple walls of Bhubaneswar. It's a very old ancient temple, more than 1,000 years old, Brahmeshwara temple. And it shows like a boat or a ship from Kalinga, ancient Kalinga, in one of the panels. Actually, it's broken right now, so you cannot see the whole thing. And the second one, you can see even an elephant on the ship. So these were seagoing ships which carried people and also like heavy cargoes like elephants across the ocean. So just to start with that, I'm gonna tell you a story. I'm gonna start with my name. And the name is Kalinga. Kalinga, then, in the past, what was Kalinga? Kalinga was a region. It's just not a little kingdom or something. It's actually more or so an overall region which spanned from the on the north from Tamralipti, from the Ganga's periphery to the periphery of Krishna Godavari Delta in the south. So this entire region used to be known as Kalinga, the region of Kalinga. And during different time periods, this Kalinga region has been a home to different types of people of like different languages, different cultures, different like occupations, and even it has been known by different names also, just not Kalinga. And if you see today, it is the Odisha state of India still upholds our ancient identity of Kalinga. But just the like the Odisha's expanse is not just the expanse of what ancient Kalinga used to be the region. So the name, the location, and why the significance. Significance, we will see that anytime the name Kalinga comes, the memory that invokes to maximum people, like most people around the world, is like a very sad and devastating story, or a very heart-wrenching story of the invasion of Kalinga people by the then Emperor Ashoka. So that is how most people perceive Kalinga. Oh, Kalinga war. But that's not just Kalinga. Kalinga is much more than that, beyond that. And we would today, in our presentation, we would see the holistic and non-invading maritime presence of Kalinga, because of which its socio-cultural presence you can still feel across the Indian Ocean realm, and has even impacted and touched and changed and enhanced so many cultures around the Southeast Asian region. So before going into that, I'll just a little general things about toponymy. I'm not going to go into details, but just to say like why a name is important, why the place name is important. Now, let's take two scenarios. Let's say that we live in a region, we live in a place where it's an ancient place we live, and we also have visitors visiting us from foreign lands. So let's say there is a visitor who is coming to visit us, and we have never met them. For example, like how, let's say, when Columbus was exploring or Marco Polo was exploring foreign lands, the Western explorers I'm talking about, when they entered and reached a new land, what they thought they discovered, and the people who lived there had completely different, the type of languages they spoke, the things were totally different. So how they would have perceived each other's language, that is one thing. So from the perspective of a person who is in the place where visitors are coming, and the visitor says that I'm from so and so land or a particular name, how the natives will perceive that is something that is very important in our case here. Because what the native speaker says, what the non-native speaker listen, like the visitor from the faraway land, then what the non-native speaker actually interpreted and listened according to the language phonics that they have and what they recorded in their records. They might not be the same exact thing. Like, let's say a boat from Kalinga went, or a ship from Kalinga went to China, and the person said, I'm from Kalinga, but the Kalinga, the phonics, the phonetics is not same in the Chinese dialects. So how the person would have perceived and written, it would actually differ. Same goes for ancient Latin spoken in ancient Roman kingdoms or the Greek explorers and all. So when they perceived a certain name, they would transcribe it or interpret it into their own style of recording. That's why a name might change. So my first thing is phonetic transfer. So when a foreign name in one's, like when you document a foreign name in one's vernacular language, then the second scenario is accumulation, assimilation, and acculturation, assimilation, and amalgamation. So in this scenario, think about all the people who live in different places rather than their own. Like, let's say the Indian diaspora is spread across all across the globe. Like even 200 years ago, 300 years ago, people used to go and inhabit other regions. So in that place, the initial people who went, their language was still like, in situ how it was in their parent land. But when they move to another land, what happens is over generations, like their children and their grandchildren, great grandchildren, the language goes a little slight modification and change depending on the locality or the community or the region or topography they are inhabiting. So these are all like great examples you can find from Caribbean. Let's say nowadays, a lot of the descendants of the people who went as indentured laborers to Mauritius or Fiji or Caribbean islands, the way they speak words are the words are same, but the way they speak it or write it has got a slight difference. So these two are the scenarios we have to be very carefully considering in our further pursuit. Like when we go and look for our story in other people's story. Like if we look for only as Bharat or Kalinga, it might not be the same word we will find in everyone's story. We will find the perception of the name that they have recorded, or even the descendants of us who have lived and assimilated in those areas, how they have recorded us further. So going into like, just to give you a couple of examples, like and also that there is another thing, sometimes the Indic means I'm saying the native names are different, and the way a foreign person, like non-native person writes it is different. Let's say in today's, like our case, Bharat and India, or Egypt is Mishra for them and Egypt for the rest of the world. Same is like Magyar for Hungary, but Hungary for the rest of the world. So there are hundreds of examples like that. Same thing. And like another way of like how names are important is like all these place names or food names and all, which bear resemblance to another place. Like we would say, for example, like in South Indian languages, one of my friends recently told me Kantari is one of the birds actually, which supposed to have come from Gandhar or Kandahar. So that name has persisted there as Kantari. In Odia, we call Billati Baigana for tomatoes. Tomatoes are not Indic or local to India or even Odisha. So Billati Baigana means something which has come from foreign, from the Western land. By the Western people, it has been brought. So Billati Baigana. Billati is like Vilayat, that Billata, from that Billati Baigana. Similarly, what happens is when we talk about in Indian language, we say Yavana or Odia Jabana, but they're Ionian from the Greeks. So initially they were the Greeks who were the foreigners, but later on that Jabana word encompassed even the other foreign invaders or non-Hindu, non-Indic people who came from the West. So everyone was Jabana. So initially it started as something, but then it became like a more broader term. So why I'm telling you all this, it will make sense in the future slides, like how names from different angles like have left footprints for us to just find those clues. So names as name prints, just like a fingerprint, they're as enigmatic clues in history and heritage as anything else. So before, again, like this is again another little bit prelude before starting about Kalinga. Think about our world, how our ancient historians or story keepers have talked about us, our world. Our world as a whole, they considered Bharat as Jambudvipa. That means ancient seers always thought the landmass as an island, because if you see, this is an azimuthal presentation of the world map. Actually, the entire earth has water, and in it there is the landmass, right? So by default, then all these are islands floating in a big realm of water. So no wonder our very adept seers in those ancient times in the Vedas and all other texts, they have been mentioned Bharatvarsha's Jambud in the realm of Jambudvipa. So like that, if you see, ocean and waters have always played a very, very important role in connecting people all across the world. So in Indian context, if you see the larger Indian subcontinent, we have a large coastline. It is a peninsula, right? All three sides are surrounded by water. So this is the Saurashtra, Kutch and Saurashtra coast, the Konkan coast, the Malabar coast, the Coromandel coast, Bengal coast. Like this all are still known as that. But Kalinga coast today, people don't call it as a Kalinga coast, but this, of course, had been the great Kalinga coast for centuries and centuries. And the coastal people here, if you see, there is a very powerful saying in Southeast Asia about, how like water connects and land divides. Like that, coastal people have always felt more connected to other people in the coastal belts or across the sea and living like that. So the region of Kalinga, today's topic, and the people and the heritage and the entire Indian Ocean, because that is what had been their horizon if they looked across the oceans. So that is very closely intertwined, and the antiquity and continuity is like inseparable and intertwined as always. So Kalinga, this region, as I told you, had been known in different names throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia, in fact, not just centuries. So perceived names of Kalinga, attributed names of perceived names means, as I told just before, how another person, a non-native speaker, perceives our name to be. So Kalinje, Dosarin, Ukkala, Kelling, which are like lot of different names have been perceived by non-native speakers from across the oceans, and they have recorded it like that. In our Indic texts, we will find a lot of names for that particular region, like Kalinga, Utkala, Toshala, Konga, Odra, and even now Odisha, like lot of names. So what does this signify? why would why would this little place, which is now not even known in most part of the world as Kalinga, why is it important? Why do you think people would have recorded about us? Would somebody record about Kalinga if Kalinga was not significant to them, or they didn't want to come there? Of course not. If there is a consistent recording of about Kalinga and different aspects of Kalinga from all across the globe, like all across the globe, when I say is I talk about ancient Romans, Greeks, Persians, and on this side, the Chinese and the Southeast Asians, Sri Lankans, everyone has recorded. So that means this place of Kalinga had been very significant to them once upon a time. They wanted to come here for trade and commerce purposes or cultural purposes, like lot of different aspects they pursued here. That's why we find lots of records. So that means this place was extremely significant for a long time to a lot of people around the world. And what is the significance of all these attributed names? There's all these Indic names, attributed names. That means there is a continuity of people who have excelled in this particular region for a long time, although they might have been from different clans, from different dynasties, from different groups, and the geographies and boundaries might have changed, but still everyone identified themselves and now as the Odisha as one common identity. So Kalinga region, as I said, like the coastal, mostly it is like a big coastline. And there are hinterlands also, there is hills, forests, everything. But this coastal people of Kalinga, they very early in the history, they started venturing into the bay, into the Indian Ocean, and find connections and trade and commerce with other people living across the Indian Ocean realm. So as I said, the water unites, the land divides. So coastal and littoral societies are always more connected to each other. And Kalinga being home to hills and forest people and the sea people, so both had a very cohesive, living, and at the same time, all the great natural resources which were found in Kalinga. Like Kalinga has always been home to a lot of natural resources, forest resources, mineral resources, elephants, and skilled people, making a lot of stuff. So all that cohesiveness and the cooperation that with the coastal society, it traversed all across the Indian Ocean. And who were the people, or who were the doers of such travels? They were the Kalinga sadhavas. The sadhavas are the mariners, the seafarers, voyagers, brave hearts, risk takers, shipping magnates. You can they're mainly traders and merchants, and they were the incomparable masters of the high seas. Now, Kalinga sadhavas, they're just not from one caste or clan. Anybody could be a sadhava who had a means and ends to do it, who had the risk-taking ability, like how now you find shipping magnates and all. And they were employers of a lot of different type of people who would go with them in these voyages, and they were all skilled and extremely adept at what they were doing. And with this, they carried the goods and the resources and the commodities, even the people power from Kalinga, and the knowledge sources, the spirituality, everything they carried from Kalinga to all across these places that they went for trade and commerce. So trade and commerce was the main job that they did. But at the same time, along with trade and commerce, all these other things like culture also traveled with them. Because trade and commerce cannot be just like on its own. Like when people go, they carry their culture. And and remember, these are all like long voyages we are talking about. It takes months. So when they go to a foreign land, they just don't just, unload the ship and then immediately come back. No, they have to stay there for some time and do the business of trade and commerce, and then again take the favorable winds and come back. So while doing that, you would be surprised to know that they had settled a lot of colonies there. They lived there. Some of them even married the locals there. And it is like how you would see it now. History, it's not just like a solitary thing that happened in the past. Even now we see that when people go to another place for work, they just don't finish the work and come away. Some of them even stay and, like, tend to their families and live there for years. And some of them permanently live there. Some of them come back to their original homeland. So it's like a very fluid, continuous process which happens. And when this happens, it's not just the culture doesn't travel from just one side. It's always like an exchange of culture, sociocultural ideas, political ideas, religious or spiritual ideas, art, craft, everything. So culture encompasses everything. So because of this trade and commerce, these huge enterprises that happened, a lot of cultural exchanges happened. So we can call the Kalinga Sadhavas as a brilliant stevedores of both commodities as well as culture. So they have left a lot of, memories in the Odia psyche even now. So you can see in our traditional art, craft, sculpture, poetry, folklore, stories, you find a lot of, presence of the Sadhava Boitas or the ships of the Kalinga Sadhavas, among other things. You can see them on the temple walls. You can see gods like deities depicted with the boats and ships. Also, you can see commoners, you can see royals, you can see all sorts of depictions and, signs and remnants of such a glorious heritage. So, how did this Kalinga Sadhava group as a whole, how did they connect this entire Southeast Asian realm? And where was their reach? Their reach was all across the Southeast Asian, nations, across Indian Ocean. And when, for how long? Was it just like 100 years or 50 years or something? No, it was like we find at records, like mentioned records, going back to 8th century before Common Era, which is a whopping almost 2,800 years ago, till like a continuous records of till 11th century CE, like almost 900 years ago. So these are like this time period had been the most glorious like culture, socio-cultural shipping exchange or trade and commerce exchange between Kalinga and all these regions. But after 11th century CE, it didn't stop immediately. It didn't happen like as rigorously as before because of multiple factors. We're not going to go into a lot of things from the Sadhava's perspective today because of our limited, time, and our topic is different. But what I can say is after 11th century, even after that till 16th, 17th centuries also, there was commercial exchange between Kalinga and such regions. But the most important time was this, and which all regions are mentioned, like which are the connections of the Kalinga Sadhavas, like Brahmadesa or Burma, Sinhala or Sri Lanka, China, Java, Bali in the Indonesian islands and other Indonesian islands, Cambodia or Funan, that is modern day Cambodia, Champa, Vietnam, even Laos, parts of Southeast Asia, Suvarnadesha, the more or less the greater Thailand, Malaysian peninsula and all that, what was considered as Suvarnadesha at that time. And even like you'll be in our future slide, you'll see even Maldives had a certain connection with Kalinga. So these particular places had trade and commerce relations because of the Kalinga Sadhavas. But ancient Rome and other places, the Kalinga Sadhavas might not have gone, but then there was for sure there was trade and commercial exchange with the ancient Romans, ancient Greeks, ancient Persians and everything. So this is just a quick showing of their routes. And then Kalinga, the name, because of all these previous, this shipping, trade, Kalinga Sadhava voyages, we see the Kalinga name all across the Indian Ocean, even now. So these are the names you find even now. So you see Kalinga outside India in certain places. You see Kalinga in the past also outside India in certain places. You find the names like Kling, Kainga, Keling in different aspects. So let's start with the first case scenario. Name of a region called Kalinga outside India. So Philippines, modern day Philippines in the present times, even now it has a province called Kalinga. It borders the Apayao province. So the Kalinga province, it is inhabited by a very unique, they have their own indigenous people who belong to the Kalinga culture who live there. So this place is even in the present times, you find Kalinga. In fact, the irony is if you Google Kalinga in today's time, the Google searches will take you to the Kalinga Philippines more than Kalinga as ancient Odisha's name. And then there is another Kalinga in Australia. In Australia, in the Queensland area, there is a little place called Kalinga. And this was a very, serendipitous find few months ago when I suddenly chanced upon this name. And I said, Kalinga in this area, like, is it because some people from Odisha went and put a name like that? But no, when I found out the region of the why this place is named as Kalinga, it says that it is derived from an indigenous, like an aboriginal word called Ngalinga. And that is Kalinga here, as you see in Australia now. In the past, Java, Central Java, used to have a Hindu Buddhist kingdom called Kalinga here in 6th, 7th century CE, like around like in the CE period. So 1400 years or 1500 years ago or something, or more than that. Then Kalinga as a name, not just for a place. The name used to denote a textile. And such textiles were these. The name is mentioned in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, in the ancient Buddhist canonical text, which talks about the Siddhartha Gautama, like Buddha's Mahaparinibbana. In that, the English translation says that they also strew sand all over the ground, spreading Kalinga and Kambala clothes and silken clothes on it. So for Buddha's Mahaparinirvana, his followers and devotees and people are readying the ground for laying his mortal body there, and they're putting the Kalinga cloth. So imagine a cloth that is fit for the Buddha's body to be placed on, no other cloth, Kalinga cloth. So that means the high esteem of this fabric and textile, which must have been there during the Buddha's time. It must have been there before until Buddha's time and maybe even after. So Kalinga. In more recent history, like it's like actually ancient history, but recent than Buddha's history, in ancient Tamil, the Pandyan times of Tamil Nadu, like 1,000 years, almost 2,000 years ago, because this is this particular excerpt is taken from a book by V. Kanakasabai, which he published in 1904 about the Tamils 1800 years ago. So he's talking about the Pandyan times of Tamil Nadu that time. And he says the Nagas of the Kalinga country were so famous in the art of weaving that the word Kalingam in Tamil has come to signify a cloth. And this particular Kalingan textiles and weaves were so exquisite that the Pandyan courts actually traded this good with the Romans, and most of the riches, Pandyan riches, were because of this highly prized textiles from Kalinga. That's why an entire group, like the textiles are itself called as Kalingam in ancient Tamil. Now, for the people, for a group of people, as I told, in Philippines, you find the Kalinga province. Even in Kalinga province, you find people who are who say they belong to the Kalinga culture. They're of the Kalinga tribe, and they're world famous for their Kalinga tattoos. Like a lot of features across various media and magazines around the world talk about the Kalinga tattoos. Now, Kalinga with the name Kelling. Now, here is a little variation. It's not just Kaling or Kalinga, it's Kelling. But again, remember, it's the same thing. It's just a little derivation with the, with the times or the way it is perceived. So Kelling is a cloth. Even now, it is found in Bali, in Nusa Penida, one of the regions of Bali. It is a traditional weave, but named after Kelling. And why Kaling? Because in Southeast Asia, they used to call the word Kaling is denoted for people from India because for the ancient Southeast Asians in Indonesia, Malaysia, they knew that their first contact with India was people from Kalinga. So anybody from India later who came, they called them as Kaling. Like remember this word Vilayat I told you earlier, Bilata or Vilayat used to be only for Britain, but later on it encompassed, like even Americans were called Vilayat Jare. If somebody went to America or Canada also, you would say Vilayat Jare. But initially it was like only for Britain. But just like that here, Kelling, initially they considered the Kalingans who came as Kelling, but anybody from India who came later to Southeast Asia in those days, everyone was called as a Kelling or Kling. Similarly, the people, the textiles, they were all Kelling. But very, very sadly, right now, this Kelling word has become a slur or a racial slur, and there has been a lot of furor over it. So, also with time, sometimes connotations change, or the way things are perceived, they change. But it has had a glorious and very telltale, origin of this word, Kelling. Again, a little variation again, Kainga. You would say it is not Kalinga, it is Kainga or Kaiga. But trust me, Kainga or Kaiga has to be again a little perceptive or, like a little derivation of this word. Because Kainga in many Polynesian languages, like Maori from New Zealand, or like in French Polynesian, other languages, like Tongan, like Rapa Nui, Mangariban, and so many others. Kainga as a word means a village or a country or a community or a kin. So imagine something must have been there those millennia ago or centuries ago when somebody somehow that Kalinga name would have meant that, that's my country or my community or my village. And somehow even that word is still persisting in all these Polynesian languages. So Kainga and Kaiga. Now, let's come to a little different aspect about recorded mentions, the ones that we discussed right now, where all that what we are finding, like all these name prints and these clues we are finding. But let's now go into more tangible proofs like recorded mentions from epigraphs, from texts, from ancient texts from across the world, and many other, canonical texts. So I'm not going to go a lot into it. I'm just going to be just touching upon a couple of them. But trust me, there are many, many, many mentions of Kalinga from different type of historians, travelers, monks, and other people. So they can be Indic mentions, foreign mentions, they can be epics, they can be travelogues, they can be canonical texts, like various different type of mentions are there. In ancient Jaina texts like Karakandu Chariyu, which talks about Avakinnayo Karakandu, the Chakravartin Samrat of Kalinga, who actually lived during the times of Bhagavan Parshvanatha and during Avakinnayo Karakandu's rule in Kalinga. Bhagavan Parshvanatha had visited Kalinga. And later on in the later years, Mahavira, Mahavira Jaina, he mentions about Karakandu as the bull among the kings. So he goes back to almost eight like times of Parshvanatha, that might be like 8th century before Common Era. Similarly, Buddhist canonical texts from Sinhala, like the Mahavansa, the Tavansa, Chulavansa, Mahaparinibbana. So all these have mentions about Kalinga in various different ways. Similarly, Buddhist records from travelers to India like Huensang, Fa Hien, Yi Jing, and others. There also you find about the mention of Kalinga when they visited here. Our own Kalidasa, the Mahakavi Kalidasa, in his epic poem Raghuvamsam, he describes about the king of Kalinga. Similarly, the Greek scholar Megasthenes, he was in the court of Chandragupta, right? So he talks about Kalinje as a Jain-dominated kingdom, and he talks about the royal city, which name is Parthalis, which might be Toshali, and the king has this many soldiers, this many horsemen, elephants. So he describes about Kalinga in 4th century before Common Era. Similarly, researcher F.B. Eldridge, he published a paper and a book about how the Kalinga region stretched from the mouth of the Ganges to the Krishna and dates as far back as 8th century before Common Era, and navigation and maritime commerce form part of the education of its princes. So finally, I'll take one more quote. It is from Wang Dayuan. He's not like a scholar or a monk or a geographer, historian. He was a mere traveler from China who traveled to a lot of regions across the Indian Ocean as a traveler. And it is as recent as 15th century CE, which is just like 500 years ago, 500, 600 years ago. 15th or 16th century CE. So there is a English translation of his entire account available in that. When he comes to Odisha, he talks about how the people are as honest as the Buddha, and they are more prosperous than in any other foreign land he went to. So imagine how powerful these words are. A foreign traveler saying that the people are as honest as the Buddha, they don't even pick things that they find on the road, like if somebody has lost, that is mentioned in that, and the people are all happy and prosperous. That means still 500 years ago, this land of Odisha, the Kalinga, had been like perceived in such a positive and such an awe-inspiring way to many foreigners who came here. Unfortunately, that all changed over the next few centuries, but that was how it was, and it was not us who have recorded that. It is somebody else who is talking about us. Let's go to some more records and connections from the ancient times. So I will again not go into any details. I'll just touch upon the names. So if any questions or anything you want to know more, there are a lot of things available in Sangam Text channel and other our Kalinga Itihas channels and other places. Or you can write to me, I'll give you more. But I'm just telling you that we'll just touch upon all this. So Sinhala, from the foundation of Sinhala itself by Prince Vijaya, who was a grandson of a princess of Kalinga and the Prince of Banga, Prince Vijaya, the grandson of Princess of Kalinga and Prince of Banga. He went to Sinhala and Ceylon and like the island, and he named it after his father Singabahu, named it as Sinhala. In later, many centuries later, Sanghamitra, the daughter of Ashoka, was sent there as an emissary to, spread the ideas of the Buddha. And she went from the Kalingan port of Tamralipti and she boarded a Kalingan merchant vessel to go there. Hemamala, a very brave and ingenious princess of Kalinga, who the Kalingans, who the Odia people we have actually almost forgotten from our memories, but has been treasured in the Sinhalese memories even now. Hemamala is a very important name in Sinhalese heritage. They still they enact plays, movies, books. There are sculptures. There are tales about this brave princess of Kalinga who brought with her the tooth relic of the Buddha when there was an imminent threat and attack on it at its temple of the tooth relic in Kalinga's Dantapura. Her dad asked her to take it to Singhala, which she hid which she hid the tooth relic in her long tresses and went with Prince Danta to Sinhala. And that tooth relic is still worshipped today in Kandy, in the temple of the tooth relic, Sri Dalamaligawa temple in Sri Lanka. Similarly, other kings also like Nishankamalla and others have mentioned again and again about their connections with Kalinga. Now let's come to Kalinga and Java. I personally feel this is one of the most important presence and records of Kalinga people when it comes to the Indian Ocean realm, because even now people from Odisha, we remember about Bali, Java, Sumatra in many of our folk tales and stories and other things. So Kalinga and Java. So in the Javanese texts, ancient Javanese texts, which have been translated by John Crawford during the 18th century, he writes from the ancient Javanese texts that Kalinga is the only country of India known to the Javanese by its proper name. Remember, only country of India known by its proper name. The only country familiar to them, only one mentioned in their books. Hence, they always designate India by this name, Kaling. You will find traces of all these imprints all across Java in Borobudur temple walls of Borobudur, which is a Buddhist temple. You will find Shaiva temples. You will find like similarities with Odishan Buddhist architecture and Shaiva architecture. So even Crawford mentions from the same text that it is to Kalinga that the Javanese universally ascribe the origin of their Hinduism. The Klings were ardent lovers of Shaivism. So the Shaivism that came to Java was from Kalinga that they themselves have mentioned. Even in the down the line in other centuries, records from Erlanga's reign talk about Klings who came from Kalinga as like one of the major trading groups, apart from other people also who came to trade with them. Then we come to the next one, Kalinga with Kambuja, that is also known as Funan, and Champa. So modern day Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos. So Cambodian local folklores, they still like talk about a person who came from the eastern coast of India. His name was Kaundinya, who married their own Princess Soma she was a Naga princess. And because of this union, the further like the empires or the dynasties in Cambodia came into place. Now, Kaundinya has been talked about being from the coast of Kalinga, and from the Mahendragiri region of Kalinga actually, which you can still see in Odisha. It is one of the most important mountains of Odisha with a lot of heritage and cultural importance to it. And that area, you can still find the Kaundinya Gotri Brahmins there. Then going to the pre-Angkorian period, like before Angkor what was built, you can see in some of the steles in the inscriptions and epigraphs what a Vaklin as the name of a male slave, and also the donation of a Gunadeva, a person called Gunadeva who came from Klin. So again, remember, Vaklin and Klin are the way they wrote about Kelling and Kaling. Like this is all from a paper which like the people who are expert in the ancient Khmer language, and how they have described. So Klin is nothing but Kalinga according to them. And further down during the rule of the Murundas, the king of Funan, that was again Kambuja, it seems he had sent an envoy to Kalinga, where the king of Kalinga had received him with a present, with giving him a present of horses at the port of Tamralipti. So you see the sculptural relics that you find even now, like lot of similarities between Odishan and Cambodian sculptures and architecture, be it temple sculptures or be it the ancient bridge architecture. They're very, very similar. Kalinga and Suvarnadipa, again, like many eminent historians like R.D. Banerjee, R.C. Majumdar, they talk about that Kalinga's Silodhavas might have in the later times been the precursors of the Shailendra dynasty, which was one of the most important dynasties which ruled in the Suvarnadweepa region. Now, coming to this very unique find we had found last year about the Kalinga and Maldives connection. So while studying about something else, again, it was a serendipitous thing. I landed upon how Kalinga's prince called Surudarshana Aditya was the founder of the Aditya Vansa in Maldives. And this is again not from a Kalingan or Odissan or Indian records. This is from a history of the Maldives written by one of its like most eminent persons who was himself a king, and he wrote about their ancient history like prior to the Islamic Maldivian period. Before that, what Maldives was, he has recorded in that, and the English translation is available like by a Maldivian scholar. So in that it says the Aditya Vansa was founded by a prince from Kalinga, Surudarsuna Aditya, who was the son of King Brahmaditya of Kalinga. Not just that, this Aditya Vansa, the Solar dynasty, it went on for centuries. And the last, the descendant of that Aditya Vansa was a princess. Her name was Damahar. And Damahar actually got married to a Somavanshi, a lunar dynasty prince from Kalinga. His name was Sri Baladitya. So the start of the lunar dynasty also in Maldives was because Princess Damahar of the solar dynasty, that was founded by a Kalingan prince, had gotten married to Sri Baladitya, a Somavanshi prince of Kalinga. So not just this, even during all this period, there was a lot of cultural exchange because mainly Buddhist presence we find in some of the stupa relics and all in Maldives. So now going to China. This side has not been explored a lot, and people still like go little cautiously when doing this, because in China you would not actually find Kalinga name in the records. As I told you earlier, the Chinese dialects and the languages that are spoken across length and breadth of China, the phonetics, the sounds, they're very, very different than what is spoken in our Indian mainland. So when they record, even now, many of you who'd been in Singapore or areas where like there are like Chinese influences, you would see how some even English words also change because certain sounds and phonics are very different in Chinese tongue. So here, what in my personal, in my search for knowledge in all these faraway lands, first of all, I found about like the Buddhist connections that everyone knows. Of course, that how Buddhism is so important and it went from India, but also the Buddhist adepts and masters from Kalinga. They had gone to China at different times, and people from China had come to Nalanda and even to the Pushpagiri Vihara and other Pushpagiri Mahavihara and other viharas in the Kalinga region, because there were a lot of adepts and studies in this area, especially about Vajrayan. So that we will see in this slide. So in ancient Chinese records, in the Han Dynasty records from first millennium, and even in Tang Dynasty records, Tang period 7th, 8th century, you find a lot of mentions about Po or Tapo or Kanlunpo. Now, what are Kanlunpo? Kanlunpo are ships of the Kanlun people. Kanlun, Kalinga, they are two different words you would say. But Kanlun meant for the Chinese people that ships from Austronesian people who came from the south, beyond the South Seas. Now, what is a beyond South Seas for China's perspective? China's perspective, the South Sea would be something here, like beyond that, like for us, South Sea is southern part will be here, but from China's perspective, beyond this. So these Southeast Asian islands and Indian mainland, all these are inhabited by Austronesian people. Even now in Odisha, we have a lot of Austronesian ancestry people, like the indigenous tribes speaking such languages and all. Similarly, in those far ancient times, there might be more prevalence of such people. So the Chinese people have mentioned all the ships which have come from this to the Chinese shores as Kunlun ships. Now, you already have seen how the Kalinga people have been very, very active throughout like the millennia, even from 8th century, like from second 2000 years ago in maritime pursuits. So Kalinga and the Kanlun words, like if you see, they're very similar, and the type of ships and the things that they're describing are very similar to what the Kalinga people did. I'm not just saying that it is only Kalinga people who went. People from across the Indian coast also went, but here we will focus only on Kalinga because our topic today is Kalinga's name. Now, Kandlun ships were like huge ships. They could carry 600, 700 people. They were like more than even 50 meters in length. But these ships were very ingenious, that they were made from like fibrous bark of certain trees, and they were like stitched ships type of thing. The cords bound the parts of the ship together. There were no nails or things which were used, and it is recorded in a 3rd century book. So these ships were used for trade and commerce, and also these ships were the main way of how Chinese people, Chinese monks and scholars took bought passages to go to the lands across the South Seas. In those times, China didn't have large junks. Large junks means the large ships. They were only using these Kunlun ships to go to all these other lands. Later on in the time, Chinese junks came into play, Ming Dynasty and all, yeah, of course. But in very ancient times, the Chinese didn't have these ship facilities, so they used Kunlun ships. Then in the Tang period of China, there are mentions about Subhakara Simha, a very adept master of Vajrayana Buddhism, who was sent by the Bhaumakara kings of Kalinga to China, and he carried a lot of important Vajrayana Buddhist scriptures. And when he went to China, he stayed there. He translated a lot of important Buddhist sutras into Chinese, from Sanskrit to Chinese. Similarly, in later years, Pragya was another adept scholar who was living in the Pushpagiri Mahavihara, was sent by the Bhaumakara kings to China. Apart from that, as I had mentioned earlier, a lot of Chinese travelers, monks like Fa Hien, Yijing, and Huenshan have mentioned about Kalinga, their travels here, how they took on Kalinga and Kunlun merchant vessel to go back to China after their travel. All that is mentioned in their memoirs, and the English translations are also available, how Huenshan has described about Kalinga's regions. So now coming to Kalinga and Burma, in in Burma, they still remember Kalinga connection because of the Shwedagon Pagoda in Yangon, which enshrines the hair relic of the Buddha even now. And this hair relic was supposed to have been carried by Trapassu and Bhallika, two merchant brothers from Utkala. Now, here, this story again is recorded. You can see the sculpture, which is right now in Peshawar Museum of Pakistan, how Buddha himself is giving his 8 strands of his hair to Trapassu and Bhallika, since they fed him a honey cake after his enlightenment. And it is during the Buddha's time itself, imagine. So these brothers, they carried some of these hair relics to Burma, and which is still there in Shwedagon Pagoda. And additionally, these hair relics of the Buddha, they also had gifted to the Kalinga king of that time, which was found recently in one of the excavations in a casket with the Bhikshu Trapasudanam, inscription in that. And even in Sinhala, there are mentions of how they had been there. And Burma still has a place, a UNESCO heritage site called Sri Khetra. It's a pure ancient city. Sri Khetra, incidentally, is this name that is ascribed to Puri Jagannath Dham, the Sri Khetra. Even now, people in Odisha, we call Puriya Sri Khetra. And in ancient times in Burma, there was a Sri Khetra place. In today's Burmese language, it is written as Tarikitya, but it is Sri Khetra, so that it is a UNESCO site. We will do a quick run through about the reflections of a shared maritime heritage between Kalinga that we see right now. These are all intangible heritages because cultural heritages that have spanned for centuries. We see boat and lamp festivals all across Southeast Asia. In Odisha, we have during Kartika Purnima, we have Danga Bhasab, Boitabandhana or Bali Jatra. That time, same thing happens in Thailand called Lao Krathong, in Laos, in Myanmar, in Bali, in Cambodia. All these places celebrate boats and lamp festivals at the similar time in the year, the full moon of the lunar month of Kartika. Now, point to remember is all these are those coastal littoral societies which are connected with each other because of the socio-cultural and trade exchange. Now, traditional weaves, something like I'm wearing right now, Ikata Bandha weave from Odisha. Like you go across all across Southeast Asia, you will even beyond Southeast Asia, but our point is right now Southeast Asia. You will find in Cambodian language Ikat, that is the textiles name, and in Odia we call it bandha. So Cambodia, so Indonesian name is ikat. So you will find lot of Indonesian ikats even now, like getting uh, woven, and they have a lot of patterns also which are similar to Indian ikats. So you find ikats everywhere, all across Southeast Asia. In fact, this Philippines and Laos ikat fabric, when I chanced upon these pictures, I had to take a double take because this looks so similar to something that is woven traditionally in Odisha even now. Like you can see bed sheets and curtains and all like in these patterns. So in India, we have mostly like this belt is the Ikat belt. Undivided Andhra Pradesh and Odisha, that is the main Ikat weaving belt, and of course Gujarat's pattern, Patola. So the common thing about is from here and here, there have been lot of trade and cultural exchanges with Southeast Asia. Who has influenced who, we don't know, but there has surely been a definite continuous cultural exchange between all these lands. This is another very important similarity. Indonesia has kendari, a silver filigree, which is a traditional silver filigree built in Kendari place in Indonesia and Sulawesi Islands. It goes back to centuries. We have in Odisha Tarakasi, the silver and gold filigree work. Tarakasi has been there for like, we cannot even date when it goes back to. Of course, it has definitely, it goes back to the time of the sadhavas. So the patterns, the designs, the everything is so similar to each other. It is like really uncanny and very magical to see how two different places separated by hundreds of miles of ocean have the similar traditional handicraft, and none of us know about each other. Like Odia people don't know about Kendari works don't know about Tarakasi mostly. So isn't that wonderful? But how still it persists. Then words and linguists also carry a lot of such clues. Bappa is a common term of how we address our father in Odia, Bappa. Like dad or, daddy or papa, like that Bappa. Same Bappa word is also there in many Southeast Asian languages like Banjaris, Blagar, Balinese, even Ilocano and Malay. They also have the traditional form Bappa for father. Even Ibu, or Bu or Bu, the traditional form of calling one's mom in Java, we have Bo. So it's like, again, very magical to see all this. Then there was this particular word which I chanced upon, again, a serendipitous discovery, you could say, a couple of years ago. Taupoi. Taupoi is a word in Odia. It's an ancient name of a damsel from a Kalinga Sadhava family. A whole Vratakatha is is woven around Tapoi, and that particular festival is observed every year, the Kudrukuniosa with the Tapoi story. Uh, and I found when Googling Tapoi, the first word which came was Tapoi is a Maori word, Tapoi or Tapoi. That is a Maori word which means to travel. Now, Tapoi, the girl from Odisha, her brothers and her father were Kalinga sadhavas who traveled all across the Indian Ocean. And in Maori, it means to travel. Odia and Sinhalese. In Odia, we call Luna Maricha for, after during the meal, we'll take salt and chili peppers and all. In Singhala, they have Lunu Marish or Lunu Miris, which is again a condiment accompaniment, which is made from salt and chili pepper. Scripts, we will not go detail into this, but of course, the entire coast of India has influenced the scripts all across Southeast Asia. Now, almost towards the end of our talk, I have just few more, like couple more slides. Here, I want to just, this question has always like bothered me, or like has picked my mind for years. And I feel like Kalinga has such a glorious track record, which like it is more than even 2 millennia, almost 2 millennia. And when we say 8th century BCE, people were already traveling to Burma. That doesn't mean that in 8th century they suddenly woke up one day and built such huge vessels and started traveling. No, it must have continued from even centuries before that and may have been perfected by that time. So such a maritime, history and heritage has been there, and we find lots of tangible and intangible records. But Kalinga's name never comes when we talk about like great thalassocracies of the world. Like when we come talk about great sea people, Vikings come to our mind. Like they were plunderers, of course, but people know more about Vikings than any other, sea people. Same thing, Minoan civilization, um, uh, then the Venice, Genoa, and all those places in the Mediterranean, then entire Norwegian Empire, even during the in the Middle East, the Oman and Muscat empires are also great sea empires. And closer to home, the Sri Vijaya Empire and Majapahits. Everyone knows now at least about the Majapahits and Sri Vijayas. And more recently, in Indian context, people have started to know about the Chola kingdom going and doing the war with them. But hardly any mentions about Kalinga. But Kalinga's uniqueness, what I feel when compared to all these thalassocracies around the world, is its holistic, organic, and enduring presence. Because Kalinga never went to invade others or plunder others or destroy others or wage war on others or just do any bloody takeovers, Kalinga's presence had always been more holistic and organic. It is like people's presence. The people went, they stayed there, they communicated with the people, they interacted with them, they built bonds with them, they traded with them. There were exchange of ideas, there were exchange of knowledge, culture, science, everything. So what was this Kalinga's soft power, which has, although we don't find in history books or popular history or popular narratives, still Kalinga's name, what we just discussed now and saw all these imprints, it still persists. Why? Because this is her soft power, because of her people, her very enterprising and able and skilled people, their culture, skills, ships, commodities. The Kalinga Sadhava merchants, that they also took their mariners, navigators, scholars, engineers, builders, experts in different skills in art, everything, even normal people who helped in the ships and workers. Like all this, the food, everything has somehow or the other impacted and left traces and left their imprints and changed some way, or changed positively, I would feel, or like assimilated, occult with all these places. So you would ask me, then if this is the story of us and the society at present, how come we don't have any memory? Even in Odisha, we don't have much like great memory about this. We have just memory that people used to go to Bali or Java or Sumatra, but not a lot of memory. In fact, our most recent memories are always more sad, that how it was taken over or how it was vanquished by invaders. So that there is in psychology something called as recency phenomenon coupled with negative bias. So our brain or people as a whole tend to forget everything positive that went before and always try to remember what was most recent, even though it would be insipid or not that important, but most recent memories are retained. And unfortunately, in Odisha's context, the history in the last 500, 600 years, because of multiple factors, it has not been the same as the previous 2000, 1500 or 1800 years that preceded. So that's why maybe. Now, for my two extra brownie points. Here we'll talk about Kalinga in a totally different context. Here, Kalinga is not for the maritime voyage or the Indian Ocean. We see the Kalinga name now in space. Kalinga is the name of an asteroid, a minor planet group, which was discovered in 1997 by Petr Pravic, a Czech astronomer. After its discovery, the name Kalinga was proposed for this particular asteroid to be named after a prestigious prize given by UNESCO. And that was the Kalinga Prize. And what was the Kalinga Prize? Now, you saw the Kalinga asteroid or Kalinga small planet from the asteroid belt. And Kalinga Prize, UNESCO had, been the reason for the naming of that space entity. Now, what was Kalinga Prize? And still is a very prestigious prize. This prize given by UNESCO every year was started by a very great son of Odisha. His name was Vijayananda Patnaik, or as we all know him as Sri Biju Patnaik. He had given this contributions for this prize until now. The Kalinga Trust and the government of Odisha and government of India still take care of this prize of the UNESCO, which is given for the popularization of science. So two different ways you still find the Kalinga name across, our present days, like space entity and the Kalinga prize from UNESCO. So with that, I end my talk today. And I would like to say dhanyavad to all of you. Thank you so much for your patience and staying with me, and whoever will be watching this. Anything more you want to, please don't feel free to write to me at globalodia@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that talk, Preeta ji. It has been a very interactive presentation as well. There are a few questions that our participants have. One of the questions is about the mapping system, right? When you talked about the sadhavas and the merchants, so how exactly did they form the maps that helped them navigate the sea routes?
It was like we don't have any remaining maps from those times, but most of it is like knowledge which was passed from one generation to another. And the sadhavas, as I said, sadhavas were like a people who brought all this together, like the persons behind these voyages. But they had like a dedicated crews, like there were mariners, there were like people who were adept at reading the celestial, the stars positions in the night sky. There were people who knew the topography of the entire coast, which they had to travel, and what type of ship was needed to do that travel. People were adept at knowing they were experts in meteorology, like the wind patterns, the monsoons, then the currents of the ocean. Indian Ocean gyre, is a very important part of how the Indian Ocean voyages happen, right? The current system there. So that, then even the biology of the ocean, like the color of the water at places, how shallow it is, what creatures are in what places. So mapping it is as a whole, you could say, like how we say it takes a village. So map, as a concept of map, how it came from cartographers from Romans or Western world, it was a different concept, I believe, I feel, which is from the Indic perspective. It was more of a collective thing that used to happen. And our mapping was more like the Jambu, like how I showed you in ancient Jaina texts, ancient Buddhist, ancient Puranic, and all texts we talk about like Jambudipa, then Labanasagara, then Surasagar, and all that type of concept. That was still followed, like that was still in the minds of these people. But that's what I'm trying to say is they knew how to map their course just by memory and by visual and mem visual memory is always like a very good way of memory. So like they didn't go from like the coast, like here point A directly to Indonesian side. They traversed the coast down the coastline towards Sinhala. At Sinhala they would make a break again. From Sri Lanka they would traverse and go to the Nicobar Island, like present day Nicobar, break then Sumatra. Means the coast they traverse, they didn't just traverse the ocean just like that how a flight will go. So at the coastline they would have all these physical, like the mountains or some, like those ancient lighthouses, how the coast changed, how what would you expect after this. So these were all records which were very carefully guarded and passed from one generation to the other, and each group had its own knowledge to keep. Somebody had a knowledge of, as I said, like the stars, or somebody had to do the Matsya Yantra and other compass type of the actual the compasses and the mariner things. Somebody had to study the winds and other things. And above all this, there was one captain of the ship who had to have the knowledge about everything, about the science, about this, about people management. But they had their own department of, and just think about this, these ships are not just a rowboat. These ships were full-fledged proper ships in those days also, these boiters. Some of these boiters were 4 to 5 storied high, and each boiter had all these different type of people who worked. And one more thing I didn't add, because we cannot touch upon everything, right? They carried land finding birds with them, dishakaka. Dishakaka has been in use not just in Kalinga, entire Indian, our Bharatvarshas, that entire antiquity of like navigation. You go and find in the Sindhu Saraswati civilization, in the Harappan Mohenjo-daron seals, you'd find like depiction of Dishakaka. You'd find Dishakakas in even Indonesian ikats. You would find Dishakaka in Odia Pattachitra. What are Dishakaka, you would ask me? They're something like land finding birds, or like how we use a GPS. So let's say they are in the seas and somehow they don't know, like it's a new voyage for them, not like the regular or the known path. Somehow the ship has veered off their way, and they're in uncharted waters. So how would they know that the land is near? They would send these dishakakas, and how they came back or not come back, or the time which that all like was pointers to the land that was lying ahead. So this was again like, I don't know if that answers your question, whoever asked. Sorry about but this is again, these are all like cumulative things which would be happening. So does that answer your question?
I think that answers the question brilliantly. Thank you very much, ma'am, for this. We hope to have many such talks with you. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you all.